Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our court for this press conference. And this evening, we are being addressed by the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Amor Motley. Prime Minister is joined this evening by the French Minister of State for Development, Francophonie, and International Partnerships, Christoula Zakopoulou. As you can see, the Prime Minister, as she's joined by the Minister, we will invite the members of the media who are present to engage with the principals following the address. At this point, I'll invite the French Minister to open the remarks.
Christoula?
Okay. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I'm delighted to be here in Barbados, and I would, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your warm welcome, me and of course all my delegation. I'm delighted because Barbados is actually an incredible island, yet it had never seen a French minister before. And of course, I'm delighted because I know your aspiring Prime Minister very well, and I wanted to see the place which shaped her characters and ideas. Dear Mia, you are a powerful voice for the most vulnerable countries and beyond. You are a talented advocate for global justice, and you have made huge contribution to global awareness of climate injustice, of the need to drastically increase financial solidarity towards vulnerable countries, and most importantly, of the fact that those vulnerabilities are deeply linked to the current limits of our international financial system. We share your assessment of major global challenges, and most importantly, we share your determination expressed in your Bridgetown agenda to address the root causes of these challenges. Under President Macron's leadership, France and Europe have made major contribution to the fight for international solidarity and global justice. France has doubled its development finance over the last years. On climate finance, France and Europe do much more than they first share. Europe also played a key role, and you know this, to initiate the creation of a loss and damage fund at COP27. I could also evoke the response that France and, of course, the European Union are bringing to the health, energy, or food crisis. Every time our approach is to support the reinforcement of structural capacity in vulnerable countries to strengthen their long-term sovereignty. We did it to strengthen local vaccine production through the COVAX initiative. We are doing it to strengthen local agricultural capacities through the Farm Initiative, and we're doing it to support the emitters to phase out of coal out through the Just Energy Transition Partnership. Under President Macron's impulse and in close coordination, of course, with other member states and other partners, we have also started to address financial challenges. During the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, President Macron hosted a summit in Paris to support African economies for their recoveries. On that occasion, we initiated a movement that led to a G20 commitment to reallocate $100 billion of SDRs received by developed countries to more vulnerable ones. France has already reallocated 20% of its share and has committed to reach 30%. We must maintain the pressures on everyone else to take their part. But now, dear Prime Minister, we agree with you. It's the moment to go farther and to go faster. As you and President Macron have said on multiple occasions, we need to reform the international financial architecture. Now is the right time to act because we are facing overlapping crises, which are compromising our ability to reach the Sustainable Development Goals and exacerbating financial needs, particularly in developing countries. But it's time to act because current responses are too narrow and short-sighted and fail to address the structural challenges and long-term needs. And of course, because global awareness of the need to act is progressing every day. Political momentum is building up, as we can see through concrete examples. Since the annual meetings in Washington last October, we're making concrete progress on the much-needed evolution of the World Bank's instruments and mandate. The reallocation of SDR is progressing, and Barbados is a concrete example of that. The debate on debt treatment is moving forward. The debate on new recurrent sources of financing, such as taxation, may be soon relaunched. The action of inspiring leaders is moving us forward. And of course, the arrival of leaders such as President Gustavo Petro in Colombia, where I was last week, and Lula in Brazil, when, dear Prime Minister, you were last week, is also a sign of hope for global justice. So it's the time to build structural, long-term, and global solution. It's the time to address the root causes of global challenges and help us build a better and a fairer system. And we need to build new solutions together in the spirit of inclusive international partnership that I'm strongly advocated for. We are just determined, as you are, dear Mia, and we're proud to work with you and to push forward an ambitious agenda. This is why, after your meeting during COP27 with President Macron, it was a very important moment, and after this, in Bali, during the G20, he announced that the organization of a summit for a new global financial pact in Paris on the 23 of June. We have identified 4 topics on which we need concrete progress, and we are building also, we're thinking with the Prime Minister what else we can add. First of all, providing budgetary space and liquidity to vulnerable countries. This question deals with the debt treatment, SDR reallocation, but also with the overall evolution of the World Bank and other multilateral development banks. Second, supporting the development of local private sector in the most vulnerable countries to foster quality jobs and ensure long-term growth. Third, finding ways to scale up investment in green infrastructure in order to accelerate the green sustainable transition. And last but not least, we need to identify new ways to raise additional financial resources to address increasing needs such as climate adaptation and loss and damage. Those are very ambitious objectives, and to achieve them we need a collective engagement. This summit must be as inclusive as possible. All voices must be heard. Our partners from the G7 and G20 need to play a prominent role, particularly India and Japan, the current G20 and G7 presidencies, but also the USA, the EU, the African Union. And as we just discussed, dear Mia, Barbados will play a central role in this summit. The groundbreaking bridge-down agenda you proposed will be a critical building block that will feed our discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear friend, dear Prime Minister, dear Mia, I'm very happy to be here. It's the occasion to underline and strengthen our ambitious partnership between France and Barbados for global justice. You can count on France, dear Mia, and we are honored to count on Barbados and to count on you too, as a friend, but most importantly, as a partner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Minister Crisula, my dear. There's a moment in everyone's life, just as there's a moment in a country's life, when to stand still will only invite destruction. We live in a world, as we've said over and over, that is threatened by too many things now for us even to contemplate remaining still. And this is not just about climate, but it is also about our continued determination to claim development for our people. Because if we allow the threats of climate and the pandemic and of violence and of the digital divide and of food insecurity to crowd out the traditional ambition of development as captured by the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, then our people will come to suffer, and regrettably, the world is going to become a very inhospitable place for us to live. We already see the spectacle of people moving for all kinds of reasons through the Americas, through the Middle East, through Africa. And we have come to the conclusion that in the same way the world came together in 1945 to determine what a new financial architecture should look like, with the establishment of the International Monetary Fund being able to be a lender of last resort and to provide critical liquidity to preserve global macroeconomic and financial stability, to provide jobs, to provide growth, for the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development to provide long-term capital so that countries could reconstruct. And ironically, the language was reconstruction because of the World War II in particular, and World War I a couple decades before. And of course, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and Tariffs with the GATS, which has subsequently morphed into the World Trade Organization. The fact that the GATS moved into the World Trade Organization was a clear recognition that institutions ought not to remain in the moment in which they're found. Today, we have to ask the question, do these other two institutions provide the support that we need and meet the needs of the moment of the third decade of the 21st century? The World Bank, traditionally, its mission was to deal with the elimination of poverty. But regrettably, what we have seen in the post-independence era for many countries across the world is that we have not simply come out of poverty as middle-income countries, but we are now at risk of pauperization because of climate, because of pandemic, because of exogenous economic shocks like the rise in oil prices and the rise in inflation and imported inflation. And to that extent, we therefore need to change how these institutions respond to us. Now, there's a lot of pretty language for a lot of Bajans, but what does it really mean? Last night we were in St. Lucie at a town hall, Parish Speaks, St. Lucie Speaks. And the people there, person after person after person, asked about the roads, asked about the bridges. Date Tree Bridge was damaged and destroyed at a flood on a Saturday in St. Lucie, at a time when that parish, the residents of that parish would tell you, they're not accustomed to seeing those kind of floods in St. Lucie. What does this pact mean, the global financial pact that we want to reconstruct the architecture? Is that if we don't have the space to build out and to support and to become more resilient, then the damage that our people are going to face is far worse. We took the minister this morning to see the work that we've been doing on the West Coast, the revetments, the boardwalks, the things to protect from a coastal erosion. We explained the difficulties that would happen to us in this country if our water reservoirs and our aquifers, became full of salt, and our inability then to use potable water from there. We spoke about what Hurricane Elsa and the freak storm did, and the fact that even as I settle the government's estimates for the next year. We have to look and see what fiscal space we have, because even if money is available, we still have a commitment to bring our debt down, and debt sustainability is critical. That is why the first item on the agenda, budgetary and fiscal space, is absolutely critical, not just to Barbados, but to almost every single developing country, and in some instances, developed countries as well. We need to look and see how we can use legal clauses to be able to provide this space for us. If Barbados is hit tomorrow, we are the largest issuer of bonds with a natural disaster clause globally. And it means that immediately if we are hit with a certain level of flood or hurricane, we can immediately suspend our debt payments for 2 years and be able to have access to $1.8 billion, which represents just under 18% of GDP. 16, 17% of GDP now that has grown. There's no country, no company, no institution that will give our country that to help us rebuild. And why is that important? Because as insurance rates rise, we have underinsurance and we have uninsurance. And therefore, the government is the only entity, as we have seen, who is capable of stepping in to do a lot of the reconstruction. In Elsa's case, 90% of the houses that were damaged were people below the poverty line. And 95% of those people were uninsured. So you begin to understand how a simple legal clause can make the difference in terms of amplifying the resources that a country can have. Similarly, we've been talking about special drawing rights at the IMF. If we can have countries, and France has led by example, by increasing the proportion of its special drawing rights that it is prepared to put back into the pool. And they went from 20% to 30%. Now, if we can get other countries globally doing the same thing, then we begin to have a pool that can be used to amplify the resources of the multilateral development banks, whose access to resources needs to be amplified significantly. And we believe not just from public money from governments, but we believe that where there are global threats as well, we need to see where other sources of money can come from. And you'll hear us speak more about that in the next few months. Because at the end of the day, the world has become a very small place, and large countries recognize that they are as strong as the weakest among us. This is a premise that we've always known, and in our part of the world, we call it solidarity. And that is why the unions and the political movements that we've had have all been built, because all of us have always been too small to do it alone. In addition to that, we recognize as well that the things that we've started to call for have started to happen. When we first settled the Bridgetown Agenda, we called for the Resilience and Sustainability Trust that the IMF has established. It is the first time that the International Monetary Fund has made long-term funding available to countries, and not on the basis of anything other than climate vulnerability. And why? It is seeking now to treat to the causes of the problem and not just the symptoms. And that is why we feel that the Bridgetown Agenda has been able to have some level of attraction for support across the world, across the community. As recent as last week in Buenos Aires at the CELAC meeting, the meeting of Summit of Latin American and Caribbean Leaders. That is the organization that has all of the countries in the region except the USA and Canada. And paragraph 10 of the Buenos Aires Declaration speaks specifically to the Bridgetown Agenda. The Cuba CARICOM Summit that we just had here in December speaks to the Bridgetown Declaration, Bridgetown Agenda. The Commonwealth Finance Ministers meeting speaks to it. But when we met in Egypt, President Macron was very enthusiastic. And I really want to thank my sister Chrysula, who has been an excellent Minister of International Partnership for France, and who has allowed us to build the platform through which we believe that our voices and our actions, working with all others, can help to make a definable difference to the global financial architecture that the world needs now. All of the tourism and travel-dependent countries of the world exhibited double-digit decline in the pandemic. and are still reeling from it and incapable of recovering in a hurry because it effectively caused them to go back, in some instances, 2 and 3 decades. In our case, it was 14%, but in the case of the Maldives and Aruba, they were between 25 and 30%. And this, therefore, for us, is an unacceptable situation because we know that just as we've seen greater heat waves in summer and greater ice storms in winter and pandemic with the COVID-19, the slow motion pandemic that you've heard me speak about with the antimicrobial resistance, the digital divide, the reality that 600 million people in Africa still don't have access to electricity. So for them, the concept of a digital divide is a bridge too far. These are the things that will make a difference to us securing the planet and securing the stability of countries, but more importantly, human security. And I believe that President Macron, his leadership and his voice, and that of France, as a G7 country, as a G20 country, as a member of the European Union, is critical at this point in time in helping countries like Barbados and others throughout Africa and Latin America and Asia and the Association of Small Island States to be able to be seen, to be heard, and to be felt. Because for too long, we have been peripheral to the discussion. And our condition has not been accepted because people haven't seen or felt it or heard it. And in the same way, for the last 3 decades, we've made the point that the World Trade Organization has literally been responsible for the decimation of our performance in agriculture and manufacturing, not because people were wicked, but because when our voices were trying to be heard, no one heard them. When we said we don't have the capacity to distort global trade in goods, we don't have the capacity to distort global trade in services. And Bajans may ask, why, how come years ago they used to have industry down in the harbor and all the women used to go down there and work, and all of a sudden the industry gone? It's gone because it wasn't competitive. Why all of a sudden the sweet potatoes that we used to export to the UK that fetched a premium in Selfridges, you saw sweet potatoes and you saw Bajan sweet potatoes at a more expensive price? Because our farmers no longer could be competitive because of the rules. All we are trying to do, and I know sometimes it's hard for people to understand, is if we don't have a hand in helping to shape the rules, then we become a victim of the rules. And we want to thank our partners with France, President Macron in particular, my dear sister Chrysula, our ambassador who is here with us as well, because at every stage we are going to need allies and we're going to need solidarity in this battle. I pray that the world does not take long because countries like CARICOM countries and African countries and many others are on the verge of serious problems, some in terms of debt, some in terms of social difficulties, largely because of having to manage a polycrisis. What do I mean? Too many things coming at you all at once, and you can only deal with so many. So that this is to help us stabilize. There are examples in Europe. When Britain went to World War I, they first borrowed money in 1914, and then again in 1917. And they then realized that they couldn't repay that money easily while having to rebuild Britain. And they then went and said, okay, let us take these 2 bonds and issue 1 bond into a perpetual bond. And that perpetual bond, my friends, was only repaid in 2014. When we say we need long-term money to build schools and hospitals, we mean it. And that's why we were very happy when the European Union helped us with the loan through the European Investment Bank with Harrison's Point, which once again, for the first time, we are not traditionally a country that receives aid, but what it was a concessional loan that we negotiated specially that gave us a moratorium that is 2% money and that is far, far, far more capable of us managing as we sought to fight the battles. Similarly, when Germany lost the war, the countries, the G7, equivalent of the G7 countries of the world, agreed that Germany would be able to cap its debt service as a percentage of its exports. All we ask in the rest of the world now is that the world recognizes the conditions and the context within which we're operating and gives us the space. Instead of us reaching a debt trajectory of 60% debt to GDP by 2035-36, we want to be able to push it out to 2034 or 2041, or 2044. Why? Because it means then we have that little extra elbow room to spend 30 or 40 or $50 million more on roads or on hospitals, on other things, while at the same time building out our defenses. So this is not esoteric, it is real, and we look forward, Chrysula, to the conference in June. The conference will not be a panacea for everything, but like with everything else in life, it is part of a journey. And the journey is to be able to claim victory for a few things and to continue to work on the things that you have not yet been able to agree upon. And that is how development happens globally, hemispherically, and regionally. Barbados is proud, therefore, to associate with France on this matter of a global financial reset of our architecture, and we believe that we can continue to give voice and expression to the reality and condition of small island developing states, or equally middle-income countries that have become vulnerable to the climate crisis and other crises across the world. So thank you. On another note, you are the first minister, I'm told, from France to visit us, and that in and of itself speaks volumes. And it speaks to the fact that while we have no control of what happened in the past, we can control the future. And we choose to control the future by agreeing to work together on those things that bind us, like climate, like oceans, like fighting the pandemic, and fighting a number of other development issues that are critical. And those things on which we are not totally in sync, we have now the respect and the closeness to be able to have the conversation, to be able to respect each other, and to see how we can bridge the gaps. So I welcome you again. I say to you, please don't treat this 24 hours as a trip to Barbados. You need to come back and understand and learn and appreciate the island better. And I'm sure that Barbadians would love to have you back here. And we thank you for this visit. And please extend our very best wishes to President Macron. And we too would love to be able to host him one day here, recognizing that even though we don't speak French here, we can give him everything else that he wants in the Caribbean. Thank you. Any questions? There's two questions.
How confident are you now that France has clearly stated its intentions of being an equal partner? How confident are you that other G7 countries will follow suit and we can see a spillover effect and some other countries coming to help build capacity, help with resilience, build more frameworks?
How long you know me, Barry? I'm a Jimmy Cliff girl. Ironically, one of the places that Jimmy Cliff is very popular is in France. We can get it if we really want, but we must try and try and try. The truth is that we won't get everybody all at once. And I keep making the point that many of these races are races for baton passing. But we've gotten a resilience and sustainability trust. 3 years ago when we were talking about it, nobody believed it. Barbados became one of the first countries to be able to benefit from it. There are other countries now lining up to go in there. It's not quite what we want because it's still linked to quotas. And that's largely because not enough countries have come forward, like France, to be able to pledge their SDRs to it. I am quietly confident that our greatest ally will be the climate. I am quietly confident that when people realize the extent to which this climate crisis is destabilizing and disrupting and taking and claiming lives, that they're going to understand that we don't have a choice but to act. And that's why I started this evening by saying that there's a point in your life that if you stay still and do nothing, you are sure to face doom and destruction. Bottom line is that I believe that there are some things that we will see happen this year. The World Bank didn't even want to talk about the capital adequacy framework. They didn't even want to talk about half of the things that we're talking about. The World Bank now has an evolution roadmap set out that it has asked all of us to comment on. And quite frankly, it is not as ambitious as we would like, but it is far from where they were 2 years ago. In September last year, the New York Times hosted a session with the president of the World Bank, the managing director of the IMF, and the Prime Minister of the Bahamas. And in that, the president of the World Bank was attacked on the issue of whether climate was real or not, and to what extent it was impacting his bank's operations. His answers then may not be his answers today, because I think the maelstrom that followed him after that event made sure that the World Bank has made it very clear that climate is real for them. And I want to thank them, because on the 10th of January of this year, Barbados got a loan through exceptional access with the World Bank that we would not otherwise have gotten. And I want to thank all who would have assisted and supported us, including the French. I say these things, therefore, to say to you that I expect some progress, but I also know that we live in the real world, and that battles sometimes have to take time in order to change. But as long as the world starts to get hotter, as long as 96 degrees in the shade is no longer the metric for heat, as Third World taught us, then we have problems. As long as Wyoming can come within 30 degrees of the temperature on Mars, then we have problems. And quite frankly, as long as we understand that, then I think that you'll see more action. Even if we don't immediately see it now, within the next few years, people are going to move to save the earth and to save the biodiversity and to save the soils.
And if I can say, I'd like just to add something. You asked the Prime Minister, I think, if we can trust. I think the most important is the confidence. We are in front in this situation, and we have to face all together. You know me, I'm a doctor, and I know what it means during the pandemic. You see that a virus from China arrived and changed the life of everybody, of everybody. There's no rich, there's not poor. There's not big, there's not small countries. This is our world. That's why when March 2020, when the life of everybody changed, President Macron, he said at the beginning, the first 2 weeks, that we have to think about all the world. So that's why he pushed this initiative of COVAX. That means how we can help people who cannot buy vaccine. It was for the first time that we had a response of, maybe it was not perfect, but it was for the first time that we saw this solidarity. And I think that now with the aggression, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, you see this food insecurity. We support, I said like President Macron, what he supports, that we have to help everybody to have their own sovereignty. That is the food, the energy access. It's exactly what the Prime Minister said, that we are very confident because we realized that when we go to the COP28, to the COP15, to all of these big summits, we are at the end of the story, and the end. The new funds, the pledges, we can do it. But if we cannot change the life of people, and that's why this year is very important. That's why also I'm here to say that we have, of course, an agenda that is full. We have big ambition. It's not easy, but I think that we can move forward.
Absolutely. Any last question? Thank you. Alex, thank you very much, members of the media, and to Crisula, to you and your delegation, once again, thank you for coming to Barbados, and to your honorary consul who continues to fly the flag high here, thank you as well. We believe that this is an important moment for not just our country, our region, your country, but our world. And we see this, as I said, as a building blocks. So thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Merci. Merci.
I wish I could talk as
Eh?
English as good as you speak English.